How to Succeed During a Pandemic. I'm Wendy Lally, your host, and I am delighted that you could join us today. We have a terrific show today. It's a little bit unusual because we're not going to be talking about business, although in a way it's business. It's the business of writing. And my guests today are from the Oak Park Writers Group. And that's going to be the core of our show. Our show is actually an interview show with people who have not only been managing to survive during this pandemic, but actually thrive. And when I wanted to start a radio show, I had a conversation with the owner of this station who was asking me if I'd like to do this. And of course, I jumped at it. It was a wonderful opportunity. I thought it would be great to interview people that are not only meeting the challenge of COVID-19, because it is a challenging time for all of us, but we're willing to share the wisdom of how they were doing so with other people. And that's really the show. My business is I'm a copywriter and marketing strategist. So in the course of my professional life, I often interview people and help them market whatever it is they do. And I'm kind of doing that right now. Today, as I said, we have the Oak Park Writers Group. And before we begin, before I introduce them all, or they introduce themselves, which would be much more interesting, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what a writers group is, because many of you perhaps don't know. Writing is a very solitary occupation. You need to kind of get inside yourself to develop characters, and even if you're writing things that are nonfiction, it still is something you kind of do on your own. And yet, it's tremendously helpful to have other people's input, to have their feedback on what it is you're doing. So you can see if it makes sense to somebody else, because obviously it makes sense to you, but it may not come across the same way to other people. And what a writers group is a group of people who, like you, are writing, and you gather together. In the case of the Oak Park Writers Group, it's twice a month, and you share what you've been working on and get their feedback. And then you can kind of go on, you can make changes, you can make corrections, you can make additions, whatever it is, whatever direction they give you that, hopefully you agree with, and that you can use to improve. So that's what a writers group is, and that's what this group is. And now I'm going to ask Gary. Gary, how do you pronounce your name?
Belenke.
Belenke, who is... are you the leader of the group? Because I think of you as a leader, since you've been the major correspondent of mine and the rest of the members during this pandemic. Do you have an official title?
I've been handling most of the organization during the pandemic. We're group led.
It is. It's a very democratic group. I have to admit that. Okay, why don't you take it from here and tell us about yourself. What's your background? When did you start writing? What do you work on?
Okay. Well, I've been retired for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was a real estate appraiser for about 33 years with an emphasis on commercial work. So as part of my job, I inspected properties, I did research, and then wrote reports. So obviously I was writing on my job. But in terms of writing for me, I've been writing since I was about 14 years old. And over the years, I wrote stories, anecdotes, songs, poetry, articles. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided I ought to become a little more serious about it. I enjoyed my writing. I wanted to do more of it. And I live in Oak Park. I had heard of the Oak Park Writers Group. I had talked to people at an event that's held every summer in the park, where organizations have booths, the day in our village. And eventually I broke down and went to a meeting, enjoyed the people who were there, and became a member. So for about 6 years, I've been a member of the group.
Very good. Sheila, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Sheila Elliott. I've been involved with the Oak Park Writers Group for a little bit longer than Gary. I think about 8 years. But the path that I followed to get there is like very much like his. I had been working full time. Had always been interested in creative writing. I did because of my professional obligations. I was a reporter and an editor. I did public relations. I did a lot of nonfiction writing, but I hadn't gone very deeply into the creative aspects, and I wanted to do that. And another friend of mine had kind of clued me in that there was this group at the library, Oak Park Writers Group. So I went to the group, and that's how I became involved. In terms of professional background, though, despite the fact that I've spent most of my professional career writing, I'm trained as an educator, as a teacher. My background is I still hold teaching licenses in history, social studies, and English, secondary school level. And what I like about OPWG, Oak Park Writers Group, is it gives me a chance to build on both of those skill sets that I have, because one of the real satisfactions of the group, for me at least, is the kind of drawing the best out of other writers, even if it's something that you're not at all responsible for. I mean, your name is not going to go on that manuscript. The other writer will. It's very, very gratifying to me for them to say, hey, that's a good idea. And that's one of the real pluses of the group.
That's a great description. And I just want to say the group has actually been together. Gary, you said it was about 12 years you thought it had been
I
around?
believe so.
Uh, so this is not a new idea, but it's obviously a successful idea because it has been around that long.
Mm-hmm.
Vanessa, I haven't had a chance to meet you before. At least I don't think so. We might have met during a Zoom, I think, a Zoom meeting. Why don't you tell us about your perspective of this group and what your
Um,
background is?
okay, well, my background is as a criminal defense attorney. I still work. I work at 26 in California. And I'm a trial attorney, so I'm always on my feet, dealing with issues that a lot of people shy away from. And writing has always given me a chance to sort of take a break from the stresses of work life and just sort of go into a fantasy world. I'm an only child, well, was raised as an only child, and my people always told me, Vanessa, you live in a fantasy world. And so, I used to take offense at that, but then after a while, I'm like, well, maybe I do, because when I'm not at work, I love to write. I write fiction. I write short stories. I love the theater, so I write short plays. I've written a longer play that got a staged reading a few years ago, and it's just really fun to like jump away from the life that you're really living and into that fantasy world that you can create. You create the characters. You're almost like the god of the environment that you that you write, which I absolutely love. um I've been a member of the Oak Park Writers Group for over a decade. And when I came in, even though I'd been writing as a child, it wasn't like I was very confident in what I had written. A lot of times, you write something and then you're like really into the story. And then, you put it down. Maybe a few months later, you look at it and it's like, oh my God, this is horrible. Nobody would want to read this. But to be able to go to a group that's supportive and they give you constructive feedback, that's really helpful, and it's really allowed me to gain my confidence, as a writer. And so I've actually been published. There was an anthology that the Oak Park Writers Group used to do every year. I've been published in that. I've been published in other things, and it's really great to like be able to just, I don't know, free yourself from real life, go into your fantasy world, and be around people who understand you.
That is a great commentary, and I want to say to people who have thought about writing, and maybe have been writing, like all of you, I'm sure, you were writing short stories when you were kids, and certainly I was too. Although I tend to write realistic, based on my life. I don't mean realism, but uh, I'm not very good at fictional characters. So I tend to write autobiographical stories, uh, which are basically memoirs. So if you're someone who is interested in sharing your memoirs, and you live in the Oak Park area, or now because you guys are Zooming, you could join this group even if you don't live near Oak Park. And we'll tell you how to do that a little bit later. But I want to talk about that. The name of this show is How to Succeed During a Pandemic. Okay, the libraries are closed. There's no meeting place for this group. So what do? You're in a position where Vanessa was just saying, and Sheila was just saying, that you're interacting with each other. So how do you do that? And the obvious answer is, Gary?
Well, we had to make an abrupt transition because we had met around a table in a conference room for many years at the library, and it was gone. And it was like, we have to do something or the group isn't going to exist. And luckily Zoom existed, and we tried it out. And so we meet twice a week, twice a month. So we actually have 4 meetings because around the table, sometimes we'd have 3 people, sometimes we'd have 20 people. You can't have 20 people in a Zoom meeting. So by splitting it up, we'd have maybe 4 or 5 people at each Zoom meeting, and that's more doable. And whereas in the library, people would bring in their stories, bring in a dozen copies of it, and people would read it aloud and then comment on it. With Zoom, we're able to, people have digitized their writings, their submissions on Word, and they're emailed out. So everybody who's in a meeting gets it several days ahead of time, so they have a chance to read it ahead of time, which gives us more time at the meeting to comment. Plus, this way people can write their comments on the digital copy and send them to them after the meeting. And it actually works out very well. And for a number of people in the group who are working on memoirs or novels, they're able to go a chapter at a time and do longer pieces. Whereas when we met around a table, it's hard to do more than something that's more than 4 or 5 pages because you're reading it out loud. Occasionally we do it, but it was difficult. Whereas this way, even if you have 10 or 15 pages, it's easier to read it in your spare time and then comment on it. And so people who are writing memoirs and novels, this is a good way to, and especially if people attend the same meeting each time, they're able to get the background of the story and kind of follow these stories week by week as they're developing. So it's worked out well. What will be interesting to see is once we can free range again, will we simply revert back to meeting around a table, or will we have 2 different meetings, one that's around the table and maybe one that's still in a Zoom format? And we'll see what happens.
That's a really interesting idea, because I could see that working out with the shorter format being the meeting with everyone in person, and longer pieces holding the Zoom meeting for those, because people do have a chance. I love the fact that I have to admit, I did participate in several meetings of this group via Zoom as well as in person. And the Zoom I found to be much easier for me, because I could concentrate, really read the piece and digest it and make comments, whereas when I was sitting there in the room, I wasn't always, it was kind of a challenge just to figure out what I wanted to say. As reading the piece, that was an effort in itself. And then hearing other people's comments, and I would come out thinking, I should have said this, or I should have said that. And there was more of a chance to do that when we were Zooming. Do you guys have a preference?
Well, I like both. I like coming to the meetings at the library. At the library, you have like 5 pages, and you're supposed to, have copies for everybody, and somebody reads it. So you get a chance to have somebody read it out loud and hear how it sounds. And then people make immediate comments. So it's like they don't get a chance to, sort of edit what they're thinking. They'll tell you right away, what they thought, what they think. And I think that's really helpful. But I also like doing the longer pieces over Zoom because you're reading the pieces, you're comfortable where you are, you can digest, like you said, Wendy, and then think about, and then when you're talking with everybody else over Zoom, your comments sound like other people's comments, or maybe not. And I think the writer gets a chance to see like what gelled with people, what didn't gel with people. And I think it's really helpful. And it's always good to be comfortable, no driving, no parking. So, I think it's great, both ways. And I hope that when things open up again, we can still have Zoom too for the longer pieces.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
We've all made adjustments to this time, but I think it's so interesting that there are some ways to do things that actually are better when you're faced with a pandemic. I think the working world is going to undergo a change.
Yeah. I don't think, for myself, and I am very, very grateful for Zoom because it has kept me on track, having a structure, having a schedule. That sometimes that's the impetus that a lot of us need as writers to get something completed so it's ready for critique the following Thursday or whatever. You can't replace the level of interaction, the human responses. You just don't have that with Zoom, or at least I'm not experiencing it to the degree I would experience it in an in-person setting at the library, for example. And if that is valuable to you as a writer or just simply as a human being, you have to approach Zoom with that kind of qualification, not expect it to do something that it's simply not designed to do. But does it keep you on track, as far as being a writer? Yes, as long as you adhere to its schedule and its structure, it will return that sense of direction and stability to you in your work, and that can be very, very good. It's yeah, there have been changes. I miss not being able to read my work aloud. I write a lot of poetry, and reading your work aloud is invaluable if you write poetry, and
Vanessa writes plays as well, and that's another thing. I mean, you really have to read a play out loud. You can't
yeah,
get
yes,
it in your head. So again, I think that maybe the way to structure it is to have some definite meetings, or I should say meetings that are definitely saved for poetry reading and plays and things that are best read out loud, and are relatively short, so you people have a chance to read the piece and react to the piece. Because sometimes, I mean, it's something that's 10 pages long. That's a lot, I think, they ask people.
yeah, and you have to be willing to give up that other part of your time too, your off Zoom time to read,
Right.
and develop your critique. You have to arrive at the meeting much better prepared than I think anyone ever arrived at the meeting in the library, because you have to be more economical in what is being said, and the number of responses you're going to receive. So
But I think you brought up a really good point too, Sheila, which was the keeping people on track.
mhm.
And the other thing that a writers group does is it helps with self-discipline. You know you're going to go to the group and you're going to present something, so either something new, or you're going to further write that next chapter, or you're going to rewrite what they've commented on.
Mhm.
So it's a supportive thing, but it's also kind of discipline, gives you more discipline. Have you guys published something?
We've had, for a number of years, we had our own publication called
Keystrokes.
Keystrokes, which we haven't had since we've been doing this, but we had it for 7 or 8 years. and we've all had work published there. I've had stuff in the local newspaper. I've had a couple of online journals where I've had things published. So that's the extent of my publishing to this point.
I think if if we were to put an estimate on it, I would say probably half of the people involved in the Zoom meetings have published either in print or online. And because when you take, but if you looked at our membership rolls, which is much larger than the number of people involved in the Zoom groups, I think that might, decline a bit. Maybe it would be closer, somewhere between a third and a half, But yeah, I think a lot of our people, either they've taken advantage of our print anthology when we were able to do one, or they've utilized the local news, newspapers in this area. A number of our people have had articles appear on the op-ed page of the Wednesday Journal, for example, and probably other publications I'm not aware of. And then we do exchange a little bit. If we find if someone says, oh, I found a great place for microfiction, and they say, oh yeah, we can give you the name of the site. That's a great lead. And if one or two of us can also utilize the same site, well, then we're absolutely delighted, And but we have had people, a number of people now, who have completed long manuscripts, books, who have things in the works. I have a story that's going to appear in an anthology later this year. And I'm working on a collection of my work. And I know I'm not alone. I don't mean to promote myself, but I know I'm not alone in these endeavors, that everyone is involved in the same.
You are absolutely invited to promote yourself, because that's a very important aspect of writing. I just interviewed Stephen Jordan, who's also a member of the group. And of course, he is a published author of
and a lot of his book was workshopped through our group.
Yes.
And also Val G, who publishes frequently in the local paper.
Yes.
So, and as her business books, of course, are McGraw-Hill's big sellers. So we do have people that are professional writers in this group. And I wanted to, if people are considering joining the writers group and not quite sure what they're getting in for, I just wanted to put that out there.
Can I interject something here?
Oh, sure, please.
Yeah. At the same time, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone who said like, oh, I'm not at that level, because the vast majority of people who do become part of our group are, maybe they've got 2 or 3 stories that they feel good about. They regard themselves as very inexperienced, and perhaps they are. And as Vanessa said, a little lacking in confidence. So, that's
a reason to join, really.
It's very much what's kept the group going, is our welcome attitude towards people who haven't published.
And in my own experience with writing, when I was starting to become a copywriter, I wrote an ad. It took me a week. It was for a class, and I wrote an ad about Flag Day. Advertising Flag Day. That was the assignment. And I was just in love with this ad. I just thought it was brilliant. And I was working at an ad agency as a secretary at the time, and I brought my work in to show to my bosses. And one of them, I had 6 different bosses. 5 of them said, oh yes, that's very nice, good work. And the 6th one said, do you really want to know what I think? And I said, sure. And he said, it sucks. And I was totally devastated and furious. And I said, why? And he said, because you're writing the ad for people who already agree with you. You have to write the ad for people that don't agree with you. And I was so angry that I banged out this headline, which was Flag Day, a holiday for cynics, cranks, kooks, and other all-American types. So it was written about Tom Paine, you know, all the rebels in American history that people laughed at the time. And anyway, that ad that I wrote at the very beginning of my career, that got me work for 10 years. And I would never have gotten to that place without him saying, it sucks. You know, so if someone criticizes you, yeah, it stings, but listen. And so sometimes you disagree with the criticism, and sometimes you're right.
Sure. Yeah, you know.
But consider, think about it, because what you produce as a result of that may be so much better than what you've done before that, you know, it's worth a little hurt.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about the group, Vanessa. They are very kind.
But yet I'm not sure who mentioned it, you know, don't come to the workshop sessions expecting flattery. You know, don't come expecting someone to, you know, start singing hosannas about your story. That won't happen, you know. Most of the people in our group are pretty well read. And so we bring a certain expectation about to everyone's work about what good writing is. And we know we all fall far short of what we aim to accomplish, but we expect everyone, you know, to be striving in that direction. And so, yeah, we think we're pretty nice, but that we're not entire pushovers either. So
You know, but that actually, what I loved about the critiques was there was a consciousness of encouragement. So it wasn't one of those, you know, do you want the bad news first? Do you want the good? You know, it was the encouragement came first, so that you felt you were sort of armored to take anything that was not so great after that. And I noticed that because I was in some sessions where there was some pretty rough things being presented. And yet I'm sure people went away feeling good from those sessions because there was a recognition of the seriousness of their effort and what they did achieve. And yes, there was still stuff that they could do better, but they were given a direction. So it was very positive.
yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up, I'm afraid. I want to thank all of you for coming by and spending some time with us and telling us about the Oak Park Writers Group. It is really one of my favorite groups, favorite way to network and meet people and get feedback on my writing. Although I have to admit I haven't been for a while, but I do intend to come back. It's just time seems to run away from me. But thank you for keeping it up. And Sheila and Gary, I know you're the leading lights, and Vanessa, you're obviously a long-term member, contributing member.
Well, so, I think Vanessa's being kind of, she's understating her role. Vanessa was the editor of Keystrokes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. How did I miss meeting you before? I don't
I keep a low profile.
Well, I'm so glad you joined us today. It's wonderful meeting you finally. And I hope Keystrokes does come back. Because
we hope so too.
Yes.
Okay, let's make it happen. So we'll all take a vow, right?
Well, thank you very much for this.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. And thank all of you out there who have joined us. I hope you'll think about joining the Oak Park Writers Group. We'll have a little sign at the end that will tell you how you can do that. And if you're a writer or you maybe just want to meet writers or want to listen to great writing, now you can do it. You can join the Zoom group. All right. And in the meantime, please take care of yourself, stay in a little while longer, and stay well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.